So thanks for being here. We got a special treat with Lauren with us today. This is a topic that we've really been wanting to hit. As you will see in our presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit. Lauren's going to talk a little bit. I'll talk a little bit. We're both available to answer any questions. She's certainly going to be more of the expert on that side of things as far as medications and supplements may go. But just really wanted to kind of dig into this idea about medication and touch on supplements because as you will see in the presentation, sometimes there's some confusion, misunderstanding about certain things, and we just wanted to use her expertise and her guidance to educate our members and our clients and everyone that comes and sees us and shows up for these talks. For those that are watching the recording, there will be a slide at the very end. It'll have my email address. So if you have questions that pop up during the talk, you can just email me directly at that email, and I'll pass that along to Lauren if there's questions that she can answer. And then, like I said earlier, if anybody has questions as they come up, please just put that in the chat, and we'll try to hit them as they come. So, just like most of our talks, the agenda is we're going to talk about the problem. The numbers are try to clear up some of that misconception, just give you some good facts. Lauren's going to talk about how the medications actually work. And we're not going to obviously talk about all medications and all things that medications go toward. We're going to be try to focus on the things that we see the most and the medications that are maybe prescribed the most. We'll talk about things that are enhancers. So certainly, with our approach around mental wellness, it's never going to be one thing. It's obviously going to be a lot of things that kind of go into making the situation better, and improving or just enhancing. And then we'll also talk about some solutions that you can use just from a kind of system or paradigm type of thinking that will help you hopefully get the goals that you want to reach. So we'll talk about all these in a little bit more detail. We'll just kind of talk about the attitude towards medication, the cost. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then just some of the disinformation that's out there as far as medications go. So medication, particularly big pharma, they rank the lowest by far out of the 25 different business sectors that there are. In the latest survey, about 14 expressed confidence about big pharma doing the right thing. Obviously, big pharma is the ones that are developing the drugs and sending the drugs to the FDA, get approved, the ones that you're taking, those kind of things. So these companies have a very low approval rating. And I think just in general, a lot of institutions right now have a lower approval rating, but they are by far the lowest. I think we point this out just because what we think and how we think obviously influences our orientation to considering something, trying something, doing something, and even feeling like that something may help or is helping. And 8 and 10 individuals from all parties, so that's just political parties. So there's a lot of polarization in our country, but this is something that most parties agree on. That believe that these companies, pharma companies, are valuing their profits over fairness. And so I'm sure you see a lot of reporting about how much these companies make from a revenue standpoint and a profit standpoint, and it's in the B's and the billions. And so sometimes that sways our idea about how effective things can be. So just a quick quiz, just to kind of put this idea, this problem idea into focus. But if you can put it in the chat, how many drugs do you think usually come to market every year? And then how many drugs do you think are pulled off the market or have been pulled off the market in the last 3 years? So just throw it in the chat. There is no prize, unfortunately, that we'll be handing out at the end of the talk, but just to see a general sense of what you think the reality is when it comes to these two questions. How many drugs come to market every year, and then how many have been pulled in the last 3 years? We will need someone to put something into that. Thank you, Kirsten. Um, so for clarification, there's anywhere from about 30 to 50 that come to market every year. And over the last 3 years, there have been a total of 7 drugs pulled from the market. Those drugs are drugs you've never heard of in the last 3 years. And, some of them are dealing with certain things that are very niche when it comes to who they're helping and how they're being administered, that kind of stuff. And so it's a small percentage of the population that the drugs that are being pulled from are actually affecting people. So we tend to overestimate these things. quite a deal. And that's all part of just the psychology of how we start orienting and thinking about medication and its effectiveness when we start thinking who's making it, how much money they're making, and what is their incentives for doing those things. But thank you for putting the numbers in. So these are the ones, obviously, that have gotten a lot of publicity for very good reason. And so when we think of drugs being pulled, we may overestimate the amount of drugs that are being pulled based upon the numbers that y'all put in yourself. And it gets into the psychology. Well, these people, knew this, particularly with OxyContin, which one is by far the most publicized and has also been probably not probably, is been the most destructive. So they made $8 billion off of that drug, and then you can go down the line of these different companies at different times have made this amount of money. These are the drugs that have been pulled over the course of the last 20 or so years. And so you can just see why, wow, they knew that they were making money. There's been tons of documentaries and just on the OxyContin uh, endemic throughout the year. So we tend to get swayed by this one thing. It means it may be possible that these other drugs may be doing the same thing. And just to point out that most drugs out on the market that come on the market deed and do what they're supposed to do to some level of degree. Nothing's 100%. But if we are thinking from an attitude standpoint that all they're trying to do is make money, even at the cost of, human life or suffering, sometimes that is true, and most of the time it's not. And so just getting into the cost, which is, we could probably do a whole talk on this. But 82% of us believe the cost of prescriptions is unreasonable. I think part of the reason we think that is because, drugs in America on average are about 4.2 times higher for the same brand here than they are in other parts of the world. So trying to make sense of that is very hard and really requires a lot of nuance and digging and trying to understand and still may not come to a place where we totally agree or are good with it. Just the variance in pricing between insurer, pharmacy, etc. You can go to the pharmacy and it's one price. You can go to another pharmacy, it's a different price. You can say, well, I have good RX and it's this price, or I have no, I don't have insurance and they give it to you that price, but you have that. So just all those things makes it very confusing, can sometimes lead to a little bit of helplessness and hopelessness of like, what's the point? Am I getting the best deal? Am I paying too much? And so that alone sometimes can just dissuade us from getting the care that we need. And you could roll that all the way down to just care in the practice for getting therapy, or if you had to go physical therapy, whatever the case may be. So it can be very confusing, this landscape that we're in, that we operate in. And I think prescriptions in particular are really can be really confusing just because of all these variables that can influence what it's going to actually cost you in your wallet to get this thing that you're wanting to take that you hope is going to help you over the long term. And so it gets, like I said, like it's like what is true? 71% of us have higher trust in influencers than traditional media. But we could do a whole presentation about that. Point is that there's a lot of places to get information. Is that information verifiable? Is it been fact checked? Is it true? Is it good? And so it's like, who do you believe? Who do you follow? Should I be taking this? Well, I heard something about that. Is this okay? Well, there's a huge a lot of side effect profiles on this, so it gets very confusing for someone that's just a layperson, but even sometimes for someone that has that knowledge intimately. And so trying to this part of this talk is a way to distill some of that down and just talk about what we know, what we believe is true from a side effects profile, from a hey, this is how it works, this is how it helps, just to get that trust up when it comes to some of these things. Because ultimately, like if you're needing insulin, we don't have a lot of qualms about insulin. We may have qualms about the price of insulin and how much it costs and that it's overpriced. But we kind of universally believe that it is effective and needed for people that need that. And so it trying to get everything into the category as much as we can of like, all right, we agree about, insulin, or we agree about albuterol, things that we know that work and need in an instance, or if you needed an EpiPen, right? We know that that costs. We can disagree on how much it costs and how some of that's been hyped up, but just trying to build some trust, some of the things that we're doing in particular when it comes to some of these diagnoses and then the medications that we're prescribing. So that's what we're trying to do and trying to reduce that bias to give you just really good information as much as possible. And so the things that we're going to talk about, just for perspective, right? There's not a ton of drugs for these different disorders that we see on a daily basis. You know, Lauren's going to talk about ADHD. She's going to talk about anxiety, depression, mood disorders, those kind of things. So we're talking about a small group of medications that are approved for these particular disorders. Now, sometimes drugs can be used for off-label and things like that, but just to put it in perspective, like how many people are actually getting these medications on average, and this was, you know, last year's averages, but 66 million for the anxiety, 41.4 for ADHD, and then that 337 million prescription for depression. It's obviously a very big number because that sometimes is used for different reasons that are off-label. It's not always just because you have depression, it could be low mood. And I'm going to turn it over to Lauren and let her educate you about all these things and how they work and the good things that can come from them.
Thanks, Trent. All right, so we will start with anxiety and depression. If a patient chooses to not address anxiety or depression symptoms, really only 20 to 30% improvement can be seen. Addressing with medication or therapy alone, there's about 50 to 60%. But if we use a combination of these tools, we can see closer to 70 to 80% improvement. So I like to tell my patients to think of your brain like a messenger system. The brain has billions of nerve cells that talk to each other using chemicals called neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters work together to regulate our overall mental well-being. So one of the most important ones I'm sure you've heard of before is called serotonin, kind of known as our happy or feel-good neurotransmitter, because it helps regulate mood, sleep, and emotions. So how the process works, when one nerve cell wants to send a message to another, it releases that serotonin into a tiny space between them. That's called the synapse. So after that message is sent, usually the serotonin is reabsorbed or recycled back into the neuron. This process, we refer to it as reuptake. So with that in mind, we'll talk about the first class of medications that we call selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So often referred to as the SSRIs, a little bit easier to say, which block or inhibit that reuptake process. So this means that more serotonin stays in that space between the brain cells. This allows the serotonin to keep sending positive mood signals for a longer period of time, and then over time helps improve mood and reduce anxiety. So SSRIs, you've probably heard of Zoloft, Prozac, Lexapro, Celexa, Paxil, and Luvox. These medications, they do start working on serotonin in the brain right away, but it can take 4 to 6 weeks to feel the actual therapeutic effects from it. So that's because your brain has to basically rewire how it's responding. Common side effects when you first start taking one of these SSRIs would be nausea, headache, difficulty sleeping, maybe dry mouth or stomach upset. So another group of medications that we use for anxiety and depression, we call them the serotonin modulators. So they're not classified traditionally into the SSRI group, but they do primarily affect serotonin. They have a couple additional mechanisms of action beyond just that reuptake. Basically, you can think about them as having broader receptor activity. So these are newer medications called Vibarid and Trintellix. Because of that broader receptor activity, both actually have a faster onset of action than the traditional SSRIs, so closer to 2 to 4 weeks. Common side effects with these, pretty much the same, nausea, stomach upset, dizziness, or difficulty sleeping. So next class of medications used to treat anxiety and depression are called the serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, or the SNRIs. So you can think of norepinephrine as our fight or flight neurotransmitter. It affects energy, focus, attention, and most importantly, how we respond to stress. So the SNRIs are going to do that same thing. They inhibit the reuptake process. This means that more of the chemicals stay active in the brain longer, allowing them to continue sending positive mood and energy signals. Over time, this can help with symptoms of depression, anxiety, and even chronic pain. A couple of the SNRIs are Effexor, Cymbalta, and Pristiq. These also start working on the chemicals in our brain pretty quickly, but it can take 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer, to feel the full benefits. Again, the brain basically just needs time to adjust and rewire. So common side effects with these ones: nausea, dizziness, dry mouth, difficulty sleeping, fatigue, and increased sweating. There is a unique medication called Wellbutrin, which is classified as a norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor, or NDRI. We already talked about norepinephrine. Dopamine is, you can think of that as the motivation and reward neurotransmitter. So again, Wellbutrin is going to block or inhibit this reuptake process. More of these chemicals stay active in the brain for longer. This helps improve mood, boost energy, increase focus, and even can reduce cravings. So over time, this is going to help with depression, motivation levels, and can actually even support smoking cessation. How long does it take? Some people actually start to feel improvements in energy levels within 1 to 2 weeks, but it does take that full 4 to 6 weeks for the mood benefits. Similar common side effects with these: the difficulty sleeping, headache, increased sweating. Are there any questions so far that I can answer?
Doesn't look like it yet.
Okay. So all antidepressants carry a black box warning for suicidal thoughts. So that's usually a little bit scary when we mention that or start explaining that to patients. So I kind of wanted to demyth that, explain what it means a little bit more. This warning highlights the potential increased risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviors in children, adolescents, and young adults when starting off treatment or even when a dosage is changed. The warning is not saying the antidepressants cause suicide, but basically just emphasizes the need for close monitoring of mood behavior changes. So why does this exist? Adolescents and young adults particularly may experience a temporary increase in agitation, activation, or restlessness, which can actually worsen symptoms while the medication is taking that time to build up and start working. So basically, it's just important to have open communication between the patient, healthcare provider, so that if any of these concerns arise, we can address them promptly. The risk with this is pretty low. Found one study saying only like maybe 2% of patients that we see it in. So for emotional dysregulation, we use medications referred to as mood stabilizers. So mood stabilizers modulate neurotransmitters like glutamate and aspartate, which help to regulate our brain activity. Glutamate is involved in a lot of different things, but learning, memory, overall brain function. Aspartate works similarly, but it also plays a role in neuroplasticity, which you can think about as the brain's ability to build new roads. One example of this, there's a lot of examples, but one example is Lamictal. So Lamictal is going to reduce excessive glutamate release and also lower aspartate levels. Again, there's a lot of other medications that stabilize mood, but they are all going to, in some way, target a combination of these neurotransmitters. So dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, or glutamate. So we'll move on to ADHD. If a patient chooses to not address ADHD symptoms, there's very little improvement seen. With therapy alone, we see about 50 to 60% improvement. Medication alone, 70 to 80. But again, a combination of these tools can yield 80 to 90% improvement. So we'll talk about how ADHD medications work. We use stimulants and non-stimulants to treat ADHD. These medications work on dopamine and norepinephrine. two neurotransmitters that are typically implicated when someone has a diagnosis of ADHD. As mentioned previously, norepinephrine is that fight or flight or decision-making neurotransmitter, while dopamine is involved in motivation and reward. So stimulants work by increasing the release of these neurotransmitters in the brain. They also inhibit the reuptake of the neurotransmitters. This basically leads to more available for us to use, or in what we call neurotransmission, or just think about that messaging system between the nerve cells. They're talking the way we want them to. So stimulants are Schedule II controlled substances because they affect dopamine in the addiction center of our brain. These are medications. Common ones are Ritalin, Concerta, Focalin, Adderall, and Vyvanse. These ones do start working pretty quickly. Patients usually have an idea if the medication is going to be helpful for them within about somewhere between 1 to 3 weeks. Common side effects with these stimulants: difficulty sleeping, they can suppress appetite, they can increase heart rate and blood pressure, and they can sometimes cause overstimulation or increased anxiety. So the main non-stimulant that we use is called Strattera. It's going to function primarily by inhibiting the reuptake of norepinephrine. This is particularly important in the prefrontal cortex, which is our decision-making impulse control area. It does also indirectly affect dopamine in the prefrontal cortex. So unlike stimulants, the non-stimulants do not increase dopamine in the area of the brain associated with addiction, which is why they are called non-stimulants. They do not have abuse potential and are not controlled substances. Other medications in this group are Qelbree, a newer one, clonidine, and Intuniv. These do take a bit longer to start working, usually closer to 2, sometimes 3 months. Common side effects: fatigue, dizziness, stomach upset, headaches, and difficulty sleeping.
And I think just to add, like the best way to think about ADHD, if someone truly has ADHD, is you've got 4 spotlights and you have 4 doors. And normally you want those 4 spotlights trained on one door. The easiest example is the kid that's learning ELA, math, science, social studies. And so you get those 4 lights going to the right door, which would be math. Someone has ADHD, there's constantly at least one spotlight just kind of going around looking at stuff. It could be a noise, it could be the bird, it could be whatever, it could be a daydream. And the medications, along with behavior modification and therapy, helps train those 4 lights to go to the right door at the right time. And sometimes it's very difficult to do that otherwise without some sort of medical intervention if someone truly has ADHD. So that's why these drugs can be so effective and so quick. They help teach the brain how to learn in an environment that is more conducive to learning than the spotlight constantly circling around looking at stuff.
So I do always try and encourage patients to also explore supplements, whether we're starting with just supplements, adding supplements into medication treatment. These are just a few of them that can be beneficial for our mental health. So omega-3s or fish oil support mental health and contribute to the proper functioning of our body's cellular processes. They also support memory and thinking skills. Vitamin D supports healthy brain function. Zinc helps in the regulation of glutamate and GABA. So these are neurotransmitters crucial for maintaining focus and preventing neurons from basically becoming overexcited. Magnesium is necessary for the production of serotonin, so that happy neurotransmitter we've talked about. L-theanine is an amino acid that promotes relaxation without drowsiness. It is also helpful to support natural sleep cycles. GABA, as mentioned a little bit previously, but reduces the excitability of nerve cells, which reduces anxiety levels. And then vitamin B12 is involved in converting carbohydrates into glucose, which the body uses for energy. So adequate levels of vitamin B12 can help reduce feelings of fatigue and increase our energy levels.
And just the public service announcement on the supplements, if you ever talk, I always say this is like supplements are not regulated by an entity, a government agency like the FDA. There's no one testing that, hey, your omega-3 is 1,000 milligrams is actually 1,000 milligrams consistently in every pill that you're getting. So there are third-party testers that do this. And so if you're taking supplements, you'd want to make sure it will cost you a little bit more. You'd want to make sure that those supplements are truly third-party tested. That way you have integrity of what you're getting and you're getting it every time you take it. Otherwise, you don't always know. And studies have shown, somewhere up to even 30% of what is labeled on the bottle is truly not indicative of what is in there. Sometimes you're getting more, which is not great, and sometimes you're getting less, which is also not great. But the more can be problematic, particularly if it's something that builds up over time. So, like all things, particularly in our practice, like we really promote mental wellness. It's not going to be one thing, whether it's one tool, one strategy, one med. It's more about doing things in conjunction to give you the best outcomes over time. Any more than if you're taking insulin, like there should also be a lot of things that you're doing to help your wellness in your body, so it processes correctly, and you're not putting yourself in a deficit or in a spike over time. And so we're going to talk if anyone's heard my talks, about the healthy human recipe, and then, like we said, those third-party tested supplements. So, and we'll go into greater detail around this stuff, but I can't stress this enough about doing these things, and we'll talk more about why to do these things and what they do to help your body, your mind. You just want to think of kind of one soul work together as optimally as it can in that given moment or that given time of day. So sleep, if you start at there and try to do better, it will only enhance and improve all the other things. But just generally speaking, sleep is tied to so many things, and the things that I would say that are most important that get the most attention is everyone. If you're learning something new today, something novel, and if you have kiddos, they're learning hopefully something novel every day, even though they come home and say they didn't learn anything at school. Indeed, they did. And so that is being stored on a zip drive. And at night, you go plug that zip drive into your cortex and it gets downloaded. And so everything that you learned that was new gets downloaded. And if you get the right amount of sleep, go to bed at the right time, all these different things, then it'll be downloaded correctly. If you don't go to bed at the right time and get enough sleep, then you won't have it all downloaded. And so you'll have the problem of getting back to it tomorrow and having to catch back up to what you forgot or didn't get fully downloaded, because that's the only way that we truly learn is to be able to sleep to store that information. One of the other things that happens with sleep, if you get good sleep, is you have this lymphatic system. Basically, that is just your trash system for your body. And your brain does not have lymph nodes. That's why it's called the lymphatic system. But your brain doesn't have lymph nodes. So if you don't go to sleep, your brain cannot remove trash. And so at night, these little ventricles open up and turn into like little streams where the trash flows out. And so if you don't get the right amount of sleep, if you don't go to bed at the right time, then you don't get the opportunity to remove all the trash. And so your brain by far produces the most trash in a day. 20 to 30% of your trash, your cellular waste, is from your brain. So you could see the implications. Like today, my trash is supposed to go out. And if we didn't put it out, it's just going to store up, back up, and you're going to have that much more that you've got to deal with the next day. So dopamine certainly gets impacted. Just generally, if you are up between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., expose yourself to these beautiful overhead lights, you're going to have up to 30% less dopamine available to you the next day. And so as everything that just Lauren just talked about, like if you're struggling with some of those things, that anxiety, the ADHD, the mood stuff, depression, like you have less opportunity, there's less there in the cup to start the day off with, and it's already sometimes hard to get those systems to pump correctly. That's why medication sometimes is needed to get those systems pumped correctly. But you're certainly going to impact that dopamine, you're going to impact that serotonin, the oxytocin that is impacted, that lower trust and social bonding. That's what you get when someone says, hey, I really like the shirt you're wearing. You did a great job on that project. I'm proud of you. They give you a high five, a hug, those different things. You'll have less pain tolerance, so less endorphins available to you. And your circadian rhythm and social behaviors will be kind of jacked up. because you're not in sync the way you should be and the way your body's expecting you to be. So whether you had a rough night's sleep, kind of up and down, you didn't hit your waves, you didn't hit your deep wave, your REM, which is about every 90 minutes, you hit usually four of those, depending on how old you are. Um, and so you're going to miss all those opportunities just if you don't get enough sleep. So you can imagine the downstream impacts that has. And so even if you're taking a med for some of these things, like the amount of flow coming that way that the med is supposed to dam up and stop becomes really, really hard, if not impossible to do, particularly if you keep doing that over time. So just in studies, if you get 4 bad nights of sleep, and they've done this in labs, 4 bad nights sleep, you'll show up as pre-diabetic on a blood screen. And so you can just imagine the implications on a metabolic magnitude, what sleep can do for you and how it can work against you if you're struggling with some of these things. So sleep, sleep, sleep is super duper important. It comes down to quality. So how great was it? Quantity. How long did it last? Are you getting it regularly? And the timing is, when are you going to bed? And so we have these 5 chronotypes. And so just this is just a nice way of saying, like, your body's supposed to go to bed at a certain time and wake up at a certain time. And I always say this in the meetings with in the presentations, a public service announcement. If you're married to someone that has a different chronotype of sleep, it can cause friction in that relationship because you want them to go to bed when you're accustomed to go to bed, but their body may not want to go to bed when your body is supposed to go to bed. And these things are pretty well set. A lot of genetic predisposition you can play around with a little bit, but if you got somebody that, hey, I need to go to bed at 8:30 and I wake up at 4:30, and you're living with someone that goes to bed at 12:30 and wakes up at 10:30, you could see the kind of problems that would cause. Now, if you got kiddos, particularly teenagers, like there's a natural order to their timing. They're typically a delayed sleeper. Obviously, they go to bed a little later and then wake up a little later. That's why school at CMS is such a drag for that first block a lot of times, because kids just are not functionally and cognitively aware just because of their sleep schedule and sleep clock. But quality, quantity, regularity, and timing matter a much. It helps all your systems, all the neurochemicals that Lauren was talking about, work correctly or at least optimally, given what the situation is. Doesn't mean you can't get through it, just means that it's going to be harder and it's going to put more tax on those systems to work more efficiently. So, things you can do to have better sleep habits that are within your control. So sun exposure, we couldn't get that this morning, but you actually get more lumens going outside on a cloudy day than you do from these overhead lights above us. So even that can tell your brain, like, hey, the sun's up, catching in the afternoon, which we should be able to do today, because I think the weather's going to get better. So those things, not to get too nerdy, they just send signals to your brain. They turn things on and off. We'll talk a little bit about what those things are. No caffeine, generally speaking, 10 hours before bed. There are, the people on this edit side of the tail that can have, coffee before they go to bed, and there's people over here on this side of the tail that can't have coffee at all, or caffeine, excuse me. And then most of us are in the middle, like most things. No blue light 2 hours before bed. You can watch, screen like this, computer, or watch your Netflix or whatever it is. It's just this close proximity to the blue light that is messing with your melatonin, and disrupting it, sending the wrong signal that, hey, you're up when you really should be kind of coming down because the sun has come down. Try not to have exercise 2 hours before bed. Don't take a cold shower before bed, sends the wrong signal. Limit that melatonin. Melatonin is meant to be episodic, which means if you had a headache, you take some ibuprofen. But if you had a headache every day, you may take ibuprofen, but you also may, well, I would say you should go to a doctor and have that checked out to make sure there's not something else going on. And so sleep's the same way. If you have episodic sleep versus you have really bad sleep, then we'd want you to go get a sleep study, and maybe even try some different behavioral interventions. Melatonin's meant to be get you back on track, not something that you would be using all the time. And just sidebar, particularly for your young people, it has the potential and has shown in studies to delay or interrupt puberty in our teenagers or preteens, tweens, and it also can blow out your natural melatonin receptors in your brain, particularly for young people. Optimal temperature, this has been studied time and time again. I always joke, like I've finally won the war of the thermostat at my house, and we are able to get it down to 64 to 67 degrees at night. People that come to my house can attest that it's chilly over there. And so that is just optimal. Think of like the bear hibernating. And then optimally trying to get that 8 hours. We're going to give you some tools here at the end that kind of tells you your chronotype and how many hours you should be getting. A lot of times, like we'll talk to people that have, TK, kindergartners, young kids, and then has a fifth grader, and there can be a disparity in like how much sleep they need when they need to go to bed. So we'll give you some tools about how to think about that. Sunlight, like I was talking about, super duper important. We are vitamin D deficient in this country by a long shot, which means we're not getting enough sunlight on our skin. Luckily, the weather is going to continue to get better and better. About to hop into daylight savings, so it's up longer in theory, at least in the afternoon. And so that serotonin gets impacted, gets triggered when the sunlight's being emitted. It tells our circadian rhythm in the morning, which is about 24 and a half hours, like, all right, time to get going, kick off all the things, turn on all the switches if you want to think of it that way. And it also helps dim those switches and turn those switches off at night by doing this sunlight and getting that sunlight in the morning. Goes back to you get that cortisol. Sometimes cortisol is associated with negativity. The cortisol is coming online in the morning with that sunlight, saying, "All right, time to get up, get going, get moving." It's the thing that kind of puts you into action along with your dopamine. And without that, we wouldn't have that natural chemical reaction that says, get going, keep doing things. And that's where the sunlight also triggers this adenosine. Adenosine is this chemical that kicks off in the morning with the circadian rhythm. And think of it like the hourglass that you flipped over as soon as you wake up and get the sunlight. And by the end of the day, when all that sand is out, that means it's time to go to bed. So that's what adenosine is doing throughout the day. It's declining in the afternoon and it falls off completely by the afternoon to help melatonin come around and say, all right, time to get bed. You're getting sleepy and fall asleep and stay asleep. So sunlight allows you to do all those things because for some crazy wild reason, your eyes can detect where the sun is, what quadrant it's in, and it's sending these unconscious signals to tell the body what to do depending on where the sun is and how much you're getting. So the social stuff, obviously, it's a huge emphasis for us at the practice, and certainly it shows time and time again. The longest longitudinal study of all time shows that people that had the longest health span, not just lifespan, but just health while they were alive, those are the ones that had the strongest social relationships later in life. And so um, being social, having connection, having people that trust you is just so important, and we stress it all the time. But when you're doing these things, right, you're getting dopamine for that social interaction. You're helping, so you're getting dopamine is pushing you into action. You're getting that serotonin from just knowing that you have people that care about you, that want to be around you, that trust you, that you can rely on, they can rely on you. That's why it's super duper important for your young people to deal with these things, but it's also really important for us as adults. That oxytocin, like we talked about, the easy ways to think about that, if you're a mother, you got high levels of oxytocin right when your baby is born, but you continue to get over time, and it just becomes a nice social lubricant that tells you that you're safe. It helps you be empathetic and sympathetic towards others. The endorphins, um, all these chemicals, these are all the things that you get from having good social relationships. Even if you have one other person, you have a group. And that is paramount compared to people that don't have anyone, because we can see the impact of that because loneliness is continuing to climb. And we can see the downstream impacts to when people are spending more time by themselves and not putting themselves in these social relationships. So social is really important. All these things that we're talking about is super important, but this one is something that you can't get on your own. Like you can go to the gym and you can get some dopamine and you get some other chemicals from going to work out, but you can't get the oxytocin and the serotonin in most cases without interacting with people and having positive interactions. And so that's why you need all these different things at different times. Diet, there's no one diet that says, if you do this, then everything will be right and good. There's other things that we can put into our system. We would always recommend low inflammation foods. Sometimes it's knowing what foods you are inflame you. And now they have these little trackers that you can just, because blood sugar trackers, you can snap on your body and kind of tell you things that you're sensitive to. Just a kind of sidebar, if you have someone that is ADHD or if you yourself are ADHD, You'd want to know what foods that cause inflammation and that you're allergic to because they increase that hyperactivity and inattention when you are consuming them. So if you don't know what you're allergic to, it's probably good, and have ADHD, it's probably good to know that. But and they're low cost with these little sensors now. So that helps a lot, helps regulate those blood sugars instead of having these big spikes, which can also and cause all sorts of downstream issues with your neurochemicals, your attention, your focus, that kind of stuff. Taking things that, like Lauren was saying, those omega-3s, the vitamin Bs, the antioxidants, the prebiotics, the stuff that helps your body, helps your gut. Knowing what's right for you. A lot of times you can just do a blood test to kind of tell you what you're sensitive to, what would be good for you, what would be healthy for you. And obviously taking enough water. I would say most of the country does not drink enough water in the day. There's always like, how much did you drink? And so there's some parameters around that. We'll give that to you in one of the tools that we have here at the end. So exercise, obviously, all these things are important. But exercise alone, if you get that heart rate up, like we're talking about, at least 150 minutes a week in zone two. Zone two is where you can feel your heart coming up and beating a little harder, but you're still able to have a conversation. Someone next to you, you're not bent over at the waist. You don't have to go, as fast as you can, as long as you can, to do these things. But you can get this from aerobic strength training, mindfulness exercises, but the impact of exercise is profound on the mind and all the studies. I mean, it's just more and more research is coming out, and there's this huge study that's going to come out that shows all the downstream implications that things they didn't even know were happening to the body, to the gut, to your serotonin in your gut. And so basically, in some studies, exercise has shown to be, just as effective as taking medication. And so like all these things, if you are taking medication, we want you to exercise as long as it's within reason and it's what your body can sustain, your heart can take, all those things. But all these things are enhancers to your overall mental wellness, which makes everything work really well in conjunction with each other. And so we'll talk a little about as far as solutions and just paradigms of thinking to help you think about these things. We talk about this a lot, your human condition and environment. And sometimes, our human condition is not where we want it to be. Maybe we're feeling a little low, lethargic, apathetic. Maybe we're feeling too keyed up. We have lots of tools like in those moments, understanding that your environment is this, and your stress meter may be a 6, but the environment seems pretty chill and calm. So ways to get that stress meter to come down to match the environment. Or maybe, you're too low, maybe you're a 2, and you really need to be like doing something that requires more focus and more energy because the environment dictates that. There's tools you can use to bring that temperature up to match the environment. And so just understanding your human condition. Did you get a good night's sleep? Did you not? Doesn't mean you can't do things or overcome. It's just understanding and adding awareness that your human condition and how is it showing up in that environment. Environment is typically a stronger influencer than human condition. His example is that if you're in a cold room, your human condition is going to be impacted by that. It might not be as cold to someone as it is to you, but overall the environment is going to mess with you at a much greater clip than human condition will mess with environment. Um, so creating that environment that allows you to get into effort and have some distress and doing things that are hard. It's kind of like Goldilocks. It can't be too hard, right? The easiest example is, go lift 300 pounds. Well, that may be way too hard, and 5 pounds may be way too easy. So finding a place where it makes it hard, not impossible for you to get into action. And so you can think of that on a social level. You can think of that on just a cognitive level, certainly a physical level, all these places where we need to push ourselves and adapt and feel some distress so that we can grow over time and help our brain grow and develop healthy stems and neuroplasticity and all that fun stuff. So just making sure that you're following that human healthy recipe given the environment that you're given. And then are you using those stabilization and growth tools that you've always heard us talk about, whether that's the double breath or just using tools in the moment that kind of get your stress meter to come up or to come down, depending on what the environment is. So other things, we obviously are big on therapy here. We're a therapy company, but we also realize that therapy isn't for everyone. And sometimes you may not need therapy, and we're try to be pretty honest about that. And we're, as we'll talk about kind of the next slide about medication too, but just getting coaching, sometimes coaching's one-on-one, sometimes it's just talking to a friend that you trust, that you have that reciprocal relationship with, but doing the things that you need to do to create the best outcomes for your body in that moment is paramount. So changing the environment, sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you'll have to stay in that environment because it's giving you some distress and it's challenging, but it's not overwhelming you. So just understanding that you have these different opportunities and these different routes that you can use to create the outcome that you're hoping to, and just being patient, like what Lauren was saying with a lot of these medications. Like there is no, hey, this is you take this right now and you're going to feel better. I think that's some of what we're struggling with, just kind of as a culture of like we're used to things happening quickly. And so there can be some discomfort with it not happening as quick as we want, particularly when we're not feeling optimal and not feeling motivated or feeling overstimulated, whether it's ADHD or anxiety. And we want that to go away. And sometimes learning how to move through that, medication can be part of that, can help give you the ability to be able to stay in the moment or deal with that distress so you can develop some motivation and then also some outcomes that says, hey, I can do this. This is hard, but I can do this. I think most people don't like public speaking. And so teaching people how to do that is through coaching, therapy, medication, combination of all those things can help people build the confidence that, hey, I can do this and not just get through it, but I can do this. And so when the next opportunity happens or the next time I have to do it, I'm more prepared because I did it the first time and had a really good orientation to it. And so something that I really just want to impress upon everyone, and particularly, the highlights of this talk, a lot of what Lauren talked about, and how it works and how it plays out, but just understand that when you go to the doctor, whether it's us or someone else, evaluation, which is just talking, doesn't equal a prescription, right? Just because you say stuff doesn't mean we're going to write a prescription for those things. Kind of like therapy too. Like just because you come into therapy, we may say like, I don't think this is the best place for you, or I don't think you need therapy, just like medication. And just because you're given a prescription, it doesn't mean you have to take it. And so I've got a client who was given a prescription, not here, but they went into had a 5-minute conversation. They were diagnosed with something, and they were given a prescription, and did the research, and like I don't think that's for me. So just because you get the prescription doesn't mean you have to take it. But the idea is to learn about those medications using Lauren as a backstop for a lot of these things, so you can become educated about the pros and cons. Because like with all things, there's trade-offs. What we put in our body, there's trade-offs. That it doesn't matter what you're eating, what you're doing, what you're consuming, what you're spending your time with, the exercise you're doing, whatever it is, there's trade-offs. And so learning about those medications, using the information just like today that Lauren's told you about, of like when it comes to these kind of major categories of diagnoses that we see. That's the whole point, is so you can have the information and know how to work with the medication in conjunction with all these other things, particularly the healthy human recipe and potentially coaching or therapy. And then understanding the cost of what the medication. And I think that's important because we're all consumers and don't have limitless budgets, and so understanding where's the best place. We've tried to develop a tool to try to find the best place in that moment to get that medication. And sometimes that may not be at the CVS at Target. It may be at the Walgreens or places like that. So going back to the original idea of like once we get to the place of like, yes, I'd like to try this medication, having to give you the best information to where to get that medication so it has the least impact on your budget as possible. So this is a chatbot that we created through, if you have OpenAI, ChatGPT, it's a free account. They're about to give you unlimited queries, which is nice. At least that's what I've heard. But this has a lot of information about all the things that we just talked about, particularly like social playgrounds, places you can go hang out if you've got kids, if there's places you want to work out, free, low cost, maybe, and give you other options as far as cost. It tells you about all that sleep stuff that we talked about, the different chronotypes, different ways to get good sleep. So it's chock full of a whole bunch of information. We tried to make it regional to give you that information in case you had questions about what to do, how to do it, and where to do it. So it's free of charge. All you need to do is have an account or open an account. and you can ask it anything, and it will give you really good, solid answers. For anyone that wants a copy of this presentation, you just scan that QR code. We will also send this out. Kelly will be sending this out later once the recording finishes, and you'll have access to it that way. But if this is something you want to pass along to other people, we'd love for you to do that. We'd love to come out to the community and do this talk in person, wherever that may be, churches, civic organizations, businesses, other schools. And as I said, for those of you that are watching the recording, feel free to go to the website or just go to the email. You can submit any questions that you have. Certainly, if you'd like us to come out and speak to your organization, we'd love to do that. That's the way to go, through the website, or you can just email me directly to give you that information. We do have a couple of minutes if anybody has questions that wants to throw it in the chat. But certainly appreciate all y'all showing up, taking the time to be here. And I appreciate Lauren taking the time to invest in this, and thought she did an awesome job and provided some really good information for y'all. All right, there's no questions. Y'all have a wonderful day. Thank you for being here. And we'll have another talk just like this. We try to do one once a month to give you some good information. I think it's going to be what it's like to be a kid in 2025. And so looking forward to do that in April. Be on the lookout for our newsletter that'll come out next week, and we'll advertise that in there. Y'all take care.